This is session number 1, and in today's episode, we're gonna address the question, why podcasts? And we're gonna do so with not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 guest experts. Here we go.
Welcome to the Podcaster Lab, the show that teaches you how to successfully launch, grow, make an impact with, and monetize your podcast. Get actionable tips, resources, and an exclusive behind-the-scenes look at podcasting experiments on things like audience growth, marketing, and monetization, so that you'll know what works and what doesn't. Time to get into the lab. Here's your host, Yann Lunga.
Hey there, welcome to the first episode of the Podcaster Lab. I'm so excited that you decided to make this show part of your day. If you're here, it's because I assume you're interested in podcasting. So perhaps you're somebody who has been thinking about podcasting for a while, but for a reason or another, you haven't launched your show yet and you're looking for some advice, some inspiration, and that push you need to really take the next step and actually launch your podcast. Or perhaps you already have a podcast, so you're at a completely different stage of your podcasting journey. You already have a podcast, you've already launched, you know how podcasting works, and you're looking for advice, resources that can be helpful for you to grow the reach of your podcast, to increase the impact your show has on your audience. So you're looking for advice on marketing and why not monetization. If that's the case, then you're at the right place because that's exactly what the Podcaster Lab is all about. Is this another podcast about podcasting? Not really, and here's why. Sure, here in the Podcaster Lab, we're going to talk about podcasting, you're going to get some advice, some resources, and things like that. But you're also going to get access to a series of experiments. You can think of me as your personal podcasting guinea pig. I'm going to run a series of experiments here in the lab, and then I'm going to show you everything. You're going to get exclusive behind-the-scenes access at every experiment I run so that you can look at the steps, the process, and you can see what works and you can implement in your own show and what doesn't work. Every Tuesday and every Thursday, I'm gonna bring you a new episode. And in some cases, it's gonna be just you and I. And in other cases, like today, we're gonna be joined by other podcasters and podcasting experts. Before we dive into today's content, let me take a moment to tell you more about who I am in case my name doesn't tell you anything. Simply put, I'm a podcaster. My name is Yann Lunga. I'm a podcasting consultant. I'm the host of different podcasts, the Podcaster Lab, obviously, the 360 Entrepreneur, the music business show, the Jazz Spotlight, and I'm also the host of an Italian-speaking podcast called Marketers Podcast. I'm also the founder of the Podcast Success Summit, which is a digital conference all about podcasting, as well as the Podcast Success Academy, a membership site that is designed to help you plan, launch, grow, and monetize your podcast. In today's episode, we're going to address a question that is so important, not only for you in case you are working on launching your podcast, but even if you have your podcast already, because this is a question that you every now and then should go back to and really keep in mind. And the question is, why podcasts? Should you start a podcast? If you're here, it's because the answer to that is yes, but why? What would podcasting, hosting a podcast, give to you? Well, we have some expert contributions. The first one is from Kate Erickson, who is content creator and community manager at Entrepreneur on Fire, and she's also the host of Kate's Take. So let's hear what she has to say. Why podcasts, Kate?
I think podcasting is so powerful because of the intimate connection that it can create between you and your audience. Also, the reach that you have with podcasting is so incredible because it's worldwide. Anybody with an internet connection can tune in to your podcast, and that gives you an amazing opportunity to create intimate relationships with people who may be on the other side of the world. It also helps with that know, like, and trust factor, which is so important when building a business.
You heard it. Kate just made a valid point. Podcasting is a very powerful medium in that it allows you to build a global community. It allows you to build an intimate connection, because if you think about it right now, is you and I, you are listening to me, you're listening to Kate, so you get to hear our voices, you get to know us a little bit more on a human level, because you get to hear us. If I were to start laughing, for example, you probably can picture me laughing. So It's very, very powerful. And as Kate said, if you have a business and your podcast, you want it to be connected to your business, then being a podcast host helps you build what is called the know, like, and trust factor, which basically means that people typically buy from those they know, they like, and they trust. So it's a very powerful medium. What else can you do? Well, I asked that to Dave Jackson, who is somebody who's doing so much for the podcasting community. He's a podcasting coach, speaker, and the host of School of Podcasting and Ask the Podcast Coach. So here's Dave's take on what can podcasting do for you?
Realize you are reaching a global audience. I know when I first started podcasting in 2005, I was amazed. Here I was in the basement, and there was a guy on the other side of the planet that was listening to my podcast, and he liked it. So you're going to reach a global audience. You are going to build a community. There are people, I find that I attract people that are very similar to me. I've yet to meet a listener of mine that I hated. Now, the other couple of things here, you can be seen as an expert, whether you want to be or not.
Building a global audience. That is so true. And if you think about it, I'm in Finland right now and you're probably listening from somewhere else. So that's what podcasting can do for you. And I've seen that where in every of my shows, I've been podcasting from Finland and I've gotten listeners from parts of the world that I could have never guessed in a million years that somebody would tune in from, which is pretty cool. And the second part of Dave's answer ties into what Kate talked about a moment ago, the know, like, and trust factor. Having a podcast allows you to position yourself as an expert as you talk about a specific topic over and over and over again. With time, people are going to start to see you as that go-to person for learning about whatever topic the podcast covers. And that is true whether you host a solo show where it's just you, whether you host an interview-based show, or maybe you have a co-host or something like that. If you have an interview-based show, then you're gonna deal with other people, obviously, the people who you interview. And I've asked that question to Nicole Holland, who's the founder of Interviews That Convert, as well as the host of 2 podcasts, Business Building Rockstars Show and her latest, Get Guest Ready. So I asked Nicole, what can podcasting do, especially for somebody who has or is thinking about hosting an interview-based show?
The really cool thing about podcasting, both as a host and as a guest, is that it helps you facilitate a relationship with a complete stranger. And to me, that's the most valuable way that it helps build a business, that you get to reach out as a podcaster to people who you respect and admire and give them a platform. And so that's a great way to start building the relationship.
You heard it. Especially if your podcast is related to your business, hosting an interview-based show or appearing on shows as a guest is a fantastic relationship-building tool. So if you're looking for a way to grow your network, to connect with people in your industry, then you could consider hosting an interview-based show. I know that has been the case for me with the 360 Entrepreneur, for example, where I've interviewed many different entrepreneurs, marketers, best-selling authors. The interview was just the beginning of ongoing collaboration. So we've done joint webinar, they've done live training calls for the Podcast Success Academy, and some of them have also appeared on the Podcast Success Summit. So the piece of advice, if you're thinking about hosting an interview-based show, don't look at every interview just like an interview, and as soon as you're done, focus on what's coming next. Think about an interview as the starting of something, as the beginning of a possible collaboration. You may be creating content already. Perhaps you have a blog or you have been shooting YouTube videos. And you may be wondering, should I add podcasting to what I'm already doing? Is it worth it to add a different medium to my overall content creation package? Well, listen carefully to what Natalie Sisson has to say. She's known as the Suitcase Entrepreneur. She's a world-traveling entrepreneur and the host of the Suitcase Entrepreneur podcast and her new show, Natalie Sisson's Quest for Freedom.
For me personally, I think it's been an incredible medium for actually building trust and credibility with a community that I may not have been able to get in front of just through my blog or email. So from that point of view, building trust, building a relationship and rapport, and reaching a community predominantly through iTunes and Stitcher that I may not have been exposed to before.
Can you start to see some trends here? Natalie too talked about the relationship building aspect of podcasting, and she said in her case, adding podcasting, so start using a new medium, has allowed her to reach a brand new type of audience. So keep in mind that everybody likes to learn or to consume content in different ways. So if up until now you have only used your blog, so written content, or you have been using video content, keep in mind that you may be potentially missing out on a fantastic audience, a group of people who may love the content you create, but simply don't know about it because they prefer to listen to content rather than read or watch video content. We've been talking mostly about the host perspective here, but let's go back to guesting for a moment. If you're interested in using podcasts as a guest, Nicole touched it a little bit on that in her first contribution. She has something to add to that. Let's hear it.
As a guest, it allows you to build relationships as well with other podcasters and create value for them, but also to get in front of their audience that they've spent the time cultivating and curating and nurturing. And it gives you that opportunity for, if you've built a good relationship with the host, they position you well as their guest to their audience. So you really can very quickly build deep and meaningful relationships with hosts, with guests, and with audiences.
If you think about it, a moment ago, Natalie Sisson talked about how podcasting has allowed her to tap into a brand new audience, and you heard what Nicole just said. If you're a guest, then you have the ability to tap into many different types of audiences, which is great. So we have covered quite some ground here, but there is another reason I want you to listen to, because up until now we've talked about things that apply to you, regardless of the type of podcast you want to host, more or less, because if you think about it, you can still build relationships through your podcast, even if you don't interview people with other podcasters. We touched upon a few things that podcasting can do for you if you have a business, and more on that in the next episode, by the way. But there is another interesting thing Dave Jackson had to say about podcasting. So here's something else that having a podcast could potentially lead you to.
In many cases, it might lead you to getting a job. And I'll give you an example. I was the director of podcasting for the New Media Expo, which at the time was one of the biggest events around new media. And the reason I got that job is the old person had stepped down. They went to the head of Libsyn, which is a podcast media hosting company, and they said, hey, we need a new director of podcasting. Got anybody in mind? And they said, what about Dave Jackson? And then they went to Blueberry, and they said, what about Dave Jackson? And then they went to Spreaker, and I couldn't have planned this any better. They said, what about Dave Jackson?
Thank you, Dave. I loved that story. Are we saying that by you starting a podcast is absolutely certain that you're going to get a job? Absolutely not. But here's the thing. You never know what's going to happen because of your podcast. I can tell you from my experience personally, having a podcast, or in my case, several podcasts, has opened so many doors, has brought about so many incredible opportunities, both for me as a person as well as for me as an entrepreneur, so for my business. The next episode is actually all about that. So we're going to talk about why you as a businessman or businesswoman should consider podcasts. So we're going to talk about why you should consider podcasts as a tool for your business. So if you're an entrepreneur, you're a businessman or businesswoman, then the next episode is definitely for you. To wrap up here, I want to share one link with you. ThePodcasterLab.com is the website where you're going to be able to learn more about the show and listen to all the episodes. And the show notes for today's episode, where you can learn more about today's guest experts, their shows, and I also added a couple of things about myself. The page for today's show notes is thepodcasterlab.com/session1. Once again, that's thepodcasterlab.com/session1. This is it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in this very first episode of The Podcaster Lab. It's gonna be a fun journey. I can guarantee that.
Thank you for listening to The Podcaster Lab. For more tips, tools, and exclusive downloads, visit www.thepodcasterlab.com. www.thepodcasterlab.com.